Committee. I'm Councillor James Husband. I'm Chairman of the committee. To my right are my colleagues, fellow councillors, and it will be the five of us making the decisions relating to the applications before us this evening. To my left, I'm joined by officers who will be presenting the reports and also offering us advice as we go through the evening. And the officer team this evening is led by Amanda Reid, who is the Director of Planning, sitting on my immediate left. Okay, so let's get underway. First of all, are there any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chairman. There are no apologies for absence this evening.
Okay, that's good. Are there any declarations of interest for this evening? No, there are none. Now, I think we just have one set of minutes. This is from the meeting that was held on the 21st of March. Can I sign that as a record of that meeting, please, colleagues? Thank you. That's great. Thank you. Very good. Well, in that case, we'll be underway very quickly, and in a moment or two, we will start with the application at Colebrook Court before we move on to consider the application at Bridge House. So, let's see. Colebrook Court, and I think Gabby Wesley, Gabby, you're going to introduce this report, aren't you? So please, go ahead when you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Before I begin my presentation, I would like to draw members' attention to the committee addendum report, which includes further representations received by residents and includes three further objections and one letter of support. There are no new matters raised in the representations received, and so the officer's report covers these issues. The reasons for the conditions have also been updated to reflect the policies in the new local plan, and officers would also like to amend paragraph 6.131 and 7.2 of the officer's report to state that only the new additional 17 homes will be parking permit free. This is an application for planning permission for the demolition and redevelopment of the existing 4-storey building at Colebrook Court to provide a 9-storey building which is comprised of 29 residential homes and Class E retail commercial use. The application site is situated behind 75 Sloane Avenue in the northern part of a small urban block located between Sloane Avenue to the northeast, Petty Ward to the southeast, Macon Street to the northwest, and Lucan Place to the southwest. It is important to note that number 2 Lucan Place, the former Chelsea Police Station site, makes up the rest of the block footprint and already has planning permission for its redevelopment and is currently under construction. This slide is an aerial image of the site, which is outlined in red, showing the existing wider and immediate site context. Members will note that the Chelsea Cloisters is sited to the east, Marlborough School to the south, and Cranmer Court directly to the west. To the rear is the 2 Lucan Place development, which is outlined in purple. The existing site is comprised of commercial ground floor space, which is currently occupied by Sainsbury's Local, and 12 residential flats on the upper floors. This slide includes some existing photographs of the site, which show the 4-storey building and the Sainsbury's Local store, which fronts onto Sloane Avenue. This slide shows the site's constraints. It's not located within a conservation area, but it is within the setting of the Chelsea Estates, and Thurlow and Smith's charity conservation areas. There is also a Grade 2 listed Michelin House building, which is located further along Sloane Avenue, which is highlighted in the dark grey on the map in the side. This slide shows the existing elevation within the context of the neighbouring development at 2 Lucan Place. The existing building is 4 storeys with rooftop plant above, and this would be demolished in its entirety and rebuilt. This slide shows the proposed elevation, which shows the 9-storey building and the plant which would be located at the roof level. Members will note that the proposed building would align with the consented scheme at 2 Lucan Place, and the new building would be comprised of 29 residential units with the commercial retained at the ground floor level. This has been secured by condition 27 so that this remains as Class E. This slide shows a typical floor plan, and the overall mix of units in the proposals would be between 1 and 3 beds. Members should also note that all floor plans have been included in the committee pack for reference. And this slide shows a proposed visual of the development, which is looking from the Chelsea Cloisters down Sloane Avenue. There's a 2-storey podium as well at the ground and first floor levels, which has been designed to connect with the development at 2 Lucan Place. In terms of the building heights within the immediate context, the neighbouring buildings at the Chelsea Cloisters and Cranmer Court are over 9 storeys in height, and the other buildings in the immediate neighbouring context are around 7 to 8 storeys. As such, given that the proposals would be 9 storeys in height, officers considered that this would not be out of character within this particular context and would sit comfortably within the townscape. A key element of the design was to take into consideration the impacts on daylight and sunlight on neighbouring buildings, which has led to the chamfered form and design of the building. This is to allow daylight and sunlight to flow around the buildings. This slide shows the existing context which has been extracted from the daylight and sunlight assessment and shows the scope of the neighbouring buildings which were included in the assessment, particularly the Chelsea Cloisters, Cranmer Court and Marlborough Primary School. And then this slide shows the proposed form and massing of the development. Members will note the design of the development against the consented and implemented scheme at 2 Lucan Place, which is sited just behind the application site. And so they align in terms of their proposed heights. And this slide includes the proposed materials which would be used. These materials include new brickwork, bronze framing for the windows and balconies, and stone for the double-storey podium at the ground and first floor levels. Members will note that further details of the materials have been secured by way of condition 14, which would require a sample panel to be provided on site before the development can commence. This slide includes some further visuals of the proposed development, particularly at the roof level and the higher levels of the building. And this slide shows a proposed visual of the development taken from Sloane Avenue, showing the development within its context. And this slide shows the proposed development from the other end of Sloane Avenue, with the Chelsea Cloisters positioned on the right-hand side. And this is a proposed visual taken from the Petty Ward elevation of the site. In terms of the key planning considerations for the determination of this application, these include the proposed commercial and residential land uses at the site, the provision of new homes for the borough, the proposed design and impact on the setting of the nearby conservation areas, the impact on living conditions, impact on the highway network, and impacts on environmental matters and sustainability. The officer recommendation is to approve the application subject to the recommended conditions in the officer's report and the completion of a legal agreement. And that concludes the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, colleagues, there are actually no speakers for this application, so we go straight to discussion with officers. Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask officers about this? Tom.
Thank you, Chairman. I have a question about greening, and I think it says in the pack that, am I right in saying that there are no new trees guaranteed? Because I think it says in the pack that there's an opportunity for a new tree, and that will be explored during conversations around the greening plan. But is there any reason why we can't secure that tree, as at least one new tree, as part of that condition?
Yes, so our tree officer has reviewed the submitted arboricultural impact assessment and agrees with the findings in this report. And I think there are conditions requiring, so condition 11 requires further details and schemes of landscaping to include all existing trees and shrubs and proposed trees and shrubs to be submitted to and approved in writing before the development can commence. So that is covered by condition, but should members want to specify numbers of trees, that could be something that could be incorporated into the wording.
Well, I just think it would be good to have a net gain in trees, and I think the report does say that there is space, so I don't know the exact number, but some sort of net gain I think would be, if that's reasonable, I think would be good to include.
Yes, so on review in the officer's report, it has been set out in the trees section that there would be an opportunity to provide a greater number of trees, more than the potted planting that's been proposed. So that could be included in the condition.
Thank you very much.
Actually, I've got a quick question. We've got these land contamination conditions. Now, first of all, I would say that the condition that says if during construction there's unexpected contamination revealed, then obviously that's something that needs to be addressed. But is there actually any evidence that this site had a former industrial use, or anything, is there? Because I think imposing conditions, frankly, for objectively no reason, I don't think makes a great deal of sense. Can you add anything to that sort of train of thought?
Yes, so while our unexpected land contamination does cover it in the event that contamination is found, our environmental health officer did scrutinise the submitted contaminated land report, and there was evidence found of potentially contaminated land uses on and within the vicinity of the site. I think this has arisen from petrol stations and garages on the site, which have the potential to cause pollution of controlled waters. So that's why those conditions have been recommended, along with the excavation works associated with the basement, potentially increasing the chances of future occupiers being harmed by contaminants. So that's why those conditions have been recommended.
I mean, I know in Sloane Avenue, because if I recall correctly, and it's not a part of Chelsea I know particularly well, but there is actually a kind of corner site which is it has a petrol station and I think a sort of tyre garage as well, if I recall. But are we saying that we think over a long period of time that this was a sort of industrial area in Chelsea? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's mainly just the location of the application site being close to the petrol station, rather than the historic use of the area. So there could be that potential.
Well, okay, all right. I think, colleagues, I'll leave this, but it does strike me that is that's quite widely drawn. I mean, where I live is quite near Heathrow, but I'm not really sure that somebody building an extension near me would really be subject to contamination because of an airport or something. I think that there are boundaries and sensible ways of looking at these things, but I'm not going to pursue this. So, okay, if we feel this is something that officers consider is necessary, then I would suggest that we just leave it in this particular instance. Can I move on to another issue, which is within the Section 106 agreement. Now, I think we've, am I right in thinking we've agreed that the public, the sum of money within the Section 106 agreement for public art, which is, I mean, it's a substantial amount of money, £350,000, that actually can be drawn more widely. So it could be public art, it might be culture, strategy, but it also could be useful things for people who lived locally, like parks, leisure, or all kinds of normal public benefits in the area. Is that right? Have we agreed that we can amend it along those lines?
Yes, that's agreed. We've included that in the addendum report to be expanded from just public art and to public art strategy, culture strategy, libraries, sports and leisure, and parks and open space. So that's been expanded. That's
good. And my very final question, sorry to go on too long, is this issue that I can see it's a difficult one, because this building, the existing building, is being demolished. But the existing building was residential above a commercial building, and people who lived in the residential building had parking permits. I think there were 12, because there were 12 apartments above. Did I hear you correctly in saying that we had sort of accepted that it was actually the uplift in number from 12 to, I think it's 29 from memory, that it was the uplift that would be permit, that would have to be permit free, but we weren't going to take away permits from a site which had them already. Yeah.
Yes, right? Yes, that's correct. So it would be the uplift of the 17 new homes, which would be permit free.
And I think, colleagues, I would suggest that's perfectly reasonable. Very good. Thank you very much indeed.
We retain control of the
yes, I think that's right. Colleagues, thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Toby.
Thank you, Chair. This is, I suppose, partly just to get this straight and sort of minuted and all of that, and it's about the affordable housing provision. And I'm looking here, and we've got the 1.39 million, which is actually higher than was the original suggested amount after review, etc., etc. Because I occasionally, I get my head tied in knots a little bit when I go through which plan meant which threshold meant which payment, etc., etc. I suppose what I want to draw attention to is 6.86. It talks about a review mechanism included within the viability assessment to mitigate any further cost. And how is that likely or not likely at all to affect that affordable housing provision that's built in?
So throughout the viability testing, which has been scrutinised by our external assessor, it's been concluded that that is the maximum reasonable amount. And it's been based on a lot of sort of hope values as well, which would be secured through the tight sort of review mechanism. And should the market improve and sales values improve, then that funding can be secured. So it's there, and it will be secured by the review mechanisms.
Okay, I think that makes it clear. Thank you.
Well, I think if there are no other questions, then I think we can probably go to a vote. So I think we note the change that following Councillor Bennett's comments about trees. I think we note that as something that we would like to see. Yeah. Within the scheme. We also note the change to public art, which officers have put forward, in fact, in the addendum. and I think we also, yeah, I think that's, so we've got those, those two matters. Are there any other legal points on the legal agreement? I'm just looking at our representative of the legal department. Are there any other points before we move to a vote? Or Amanda? You're happy? No? You're fine. Okay. All right. Well, in that case, with those comments and all of that taken on board by officers, the recommendation is to grant permission with the various recommendations set out in the report about the legal agreement. Can I see those in favour, please, of granting? So that is agreed. That's all agreed.
Was it unanimous?
Yes. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you very much. If we can now move on to consider the application Bridge House, and I think, Arby, you're presenting that as well, aren't you? So please go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Chairman. Before I begin my presentation, I would like to draw members' attention to the committee addendum report, which includes the SIL figure for the development, along with amendments to the reasons for the conditions, which have also been updated to reflect the policies contained in the new local plan. This is an application for planning permission for the retention and repurposing of the existing building to provide flexible Class E floor space at the ground floor with a series of extensions of up to 6 stories in height to provide 14 residential units. The site comprises the Bridge Training Centre building, which is located off Bridge Close and is highlighted in red on the plan in the above slide. The site is currently in industrial use, but is now vacant. The site is located on a parcel of land which is locked either side by the Westway to the north and the Circle and Hammersmith and City lines to the south. The site currently contains a 2-storey, flat-roofed, light industrial building. It is located along the boundary with an access road running along the western edge of the structure and a car parking area located in the southern part of the site. The site is not within a conservation area, but is located adjacent to the Oxford Gardens conservation area to the north. There are no listed buildings in the immediate setting of the site. This slide is an aerial image of the site, outlined in red, showing the existing wider and immediate site context. Members will note the existing residential developments to the south of the site, industrial warehouses to the north, and the Circle and Hammersmith and City lines along with the Westway, which bound the site. This slide includes existing photographs of the site, which show the condition of the building, along with its siting to neighbouring buildings within Bridge Close. And this slide shows the proposed aerial views. Members will note that the retained building is highlighted in yellow, with the 2-storey upward extension highlighted in blue, and the 6-storey side extension highlighted in red, which is also referred to as the tail building. This slide shows the existing front and rear elevations and shows the 2-storey building, which structure would be retained. This slide shows the proposed elevation, which shows the 2-storey upward extension above the retained building, along with the 6-storey side extension. There are also a series of balconies and patio amenity areas at both the front and rear elevations. This slide shows a proposed section of the building, which is a section taken from the front elevation facing onto Bridge Close. It also helpfully includes the uses at each level of the building. So members will note that the workshop spaces are located at the ground floor level, with residential above, ranging from a 1-bed studio up to 3-bed units. This slide shows the proposed ground floor plan so that members can see access points into the building, along with a disabled parking bay at the front, along with cycle storage areas. This slide shows the existing context and has been extracted from the daylight and sunlight assessment and shows the scope of the neighbouring buildings, which are included in the daylight and sunlight assessment. This slide shows the proposed context and a 3D image of the proposed development. And this slide includes the landscaping strategy, which also shows the outdoor space improvements to the front of the site, along with associated planting. At the roof level, members will also note the green roofs and solar panels as being additional sustainability measures and benefits of the scheme. Further details of the green roof and lighting for the external amenity areas and the solar panels have been requested by Condition 3. This slide includes a visual of the proposed development, which is looking towards the tail side extension and has been taken sort of showing towards Bartle Road. And this slide shows a bird's eye visual of the development so that members can see the scale and size of the development within its wider context, along with the green roofs and solar panels at the roof level. The key planning considerations for the determination of this application, which weigh into the balancing exercise, include the proposed land uses at the site, the provision of new homes, the proposed design and impact on the townscape and the adjacent Oxford Gardens conservation area, impact on neighbouring living conditions, impact on the highway network, and on environmental matters and sustainability. The officer recommendation is to approve the application subject to the recommended conditions in the officer's report and the legal agreement. And that concludes the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Now, we do have speakers for this application. Now, we have Councillor Ahmed and also two local residents. Now, I'm not sure how you would like to do this. Between all of you, you've got up to 5 minutes. Who would like to go first? How would you like to do this? Okay. Okay, yeah.
So yes, my name's Mona, I'm councillor. I'm here in my capacity as councillor for Nottingdale Ward. I'm also here on behalf of residents of Wesley Square and Bartle Road in particular, among many others actually who've submitted objection after objection with a clear message that these proposals do not ensure good living conditions for neighbouring residents and that granting permission would mean that the council's failing its duty to preserve and enhance the character of this area in Nottingdale. So residents have said that this is arguably the most unsuitable site one could find for building new homes, which will include flats within 6 metres of a motorway and less than 4 metres from the Circle and Hammersmith and City tube line, as well as being above noisy working garages situated along the arches on Bartle Road. The objections of the development are on the grounds of height, visual amenity and overshadowing, specifically loss of light, which I want to come on to, and privacy for the neighbouring flats, which adversely impacts living conditions to, in my view, an unacceptable degree, especially to nearby Constance Allen House and Gage Brown House. Regarding the height, the scale of the development constitutes a significant change to existing buildings, none of which exceed 4 stories, and the upward extension, both the 4-storey and the 6-storey elements, are going to result in an increased sense of enclosure for residents in the surrounding flats, as well as being visible from Oxford Gardens, the conservation area. But in terms of the sense of enclosure for nearby residents, it will certainly impact the privacy for these occupants. 4 of the patio areas in the new development will overlook directly onto Constance Place and impact privacy, which the report claims won't be harmful. Also, the decking area on the roof will impact privacy, which is dealt with in the report by recommending that the decking just isn't used. Regarding the location of the development, this is an extremely confined and overdeveloped location behind Bridge House, which was already in a very confined space. And the increased density will lead to increased traffic serving both the residential and retail aspects of the development and will no doubt impact fire safety as well. There's inadequate access, even at the moment actually, but there'll be inadequate access for the proposed development for general parking as well as for emergency vehicles. I think the officer's report states that it'll actually be impossible for vehicles, be it delivery or emergency or waste collection, to enter or exit in a forward gear, something that's referred to in the report just as not ideal. The mitigation agreed is that the applicants would need to enter into a legal agreement to prevent any future occupants of the unit from applying for parking permits, which, given the fact that this is going to be partly retail units, how workable that's going to be. And I want to just, I know it's very cramped for time, but I want to talk about the impact on living conditions, particularly for Constance Allen, in relation to the direct sunlight as calculated. It gets quite technical in the report, but it's also quite shocking, some of the figures that are reported. So the loss of direct sunlight as calculated in these sunlight measures, in the NSL tests on Gage Brown House and Constance Allen House, they'll experience percentage losses of sunlight that far exceed the recommended threshold of 20%. In fact, there are rooms in Constance Allen House that are going to be losing 50% sunlight, others losing 58%, and others losing 64%. So that's 3 times the upper limit of what the upper sort of threshold is supposed to be in terms of what sunlight loss is acceptable. And the worst affected rooms, I think it's mentioned in the report, being kitchens and stairways, which actually for safety ought to be places that receive decent light. I want to mention that the scheme also fails to provide any on-site affordable housing. So all these negative impacts that residents have made very clear in these objections, none of that's even going to be offset by the added social value of having affordable homes. I'll finish there so I can allow my colleagues some time.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Now, there's a little bit of time left for you each to have a few sentences within the 5 minutes. So please.
I think we were.
Go ahead.
Sorry, may I speak? No, I was allocated 2 minutes and then 90 seconds and 90 seconds.
Well,
if I didn't keep to time, I'm sorry, it wouldn't be appropriate to withdraw that from residents who've come to voice their objections.
I'm afraid you spoke for nearly 4 minutes, but I'll allow a little bit more time, but you essentially talked for a lot of the time. But please, you've got some time to make a few points, so please go ahead when you're ready.
Okay, good evening. My objection is inappropriate site and overdevelopment. If Bryerson's primary purpose was to provide local people with well-designed, affordable homes, it would be commended and supported, but this is not the case. It appears that the purpose is to satisfy Section 106 requirements for a much larger, grander development in another part of London. This area experienced the same thing several years ago with Colvin House, which is the block facing Bridge Close on Kingsdown Close. That block was reduced from 6 stories to 4 stories following a successful challenge from local people who were concerned with this development. It should also be noted, one, that there were no photographs, images of the cul-de-sac and the limited access to this development in the presentation at all. And it should also be noted that when representatives of Iceni came to speak to residents, they denied any knowledge of Section 106 and claimed that this was an entirely independent project, a clear lack of transparency. Despite the car-free designation for the proposed development, it will undoubtedly lead to increased traffic levels on nearby Kingsdown Close, and particularly to Bartle Road, which is the only route in and out for traffic. This will add to local pollution and noise throughout the week, day and night. It is clearly at odds with the Future Neighbourhoods 2030 programme, which Nottingham Barnes is part of, one of only 3 in London, and which promotes a green recovery and transition to net zero emissions. Please note the number of objections to this development. It is a clear indication that this is an example of overdevelopment and will adversely affect the surrounding streetscape and the lives of residents living in the immediate area. Thank you.
Thank you very much. After other people have spoken, then there'll be the opportunity to ask questions. So, sir, you've got a little bit of time left. I'll try and be as generous as I can, but if you just you add a sentence or two to what has already been said.
Good evening, Chair and Committee. Apart from what's already been mentioned, the pre-planning application advice for both applications mentioned at great length the issue of the height of the buildings and overlooking, and that this was regarded as an adverse aspect of the development, but in both pre-planning advice that was submitted. But this seems to have been completely ignored. The height and the overlooking seems to have become a complete non-issue, and it is actually quite an important one, the loss of privacy and the impact on the streetscape. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Now, the applicant team is over here, I guess. So when you're ready, please, I don't know how you would like to split up the time, but you've got, well, certainly a bit more than 5 minutes, but if you need it. But please go ahead, and perhaps if you can introduce yourselves when you're ready as well.
Thank you, Chair. My name's John Mumby. I am a town planner and I'm the agent for the application. To my right is Paul Ruff. He is the scheme architect, and he'll be speaking after I do. I think the first point is, given the thorough committee report in front of you and the presentation from the case officer, I don't think I need to spend particular time rehashing details that you've already heard. I think it's worth noting, however, that the application has been developed with detailed pre-application consultation with officers since August 2022. Pre-application meetings were held in that month, October 22 and January 23. Further meetings were held throughout 2023, covering all matters of the application, including viability. Consultation continued right up to the time the planning application was made, and the application in front of you is also a resubmission of a previous proposal for the scheme, given an early application was withdrawn to allow for further design amendments, allowing further input from officers at the council. Given officer input relating to planning, design, transport and viability, as well as other consultees within the council, it can only be concluded that the design process has been exhaustive. An extensive public consultation exercise was undertaken on the proposals for the site, including a leaflet drop of 337 dwellings in December 22. A second letter delivered to 183 addresses outlining the proposals was made in August 23. A door-to-door engagement exercise was also undertaken that month. Meetings with local councillors was undertaken, as well as a dedicated consultation website produced, which provided details of the proposal. This process incurred a number of changes to the design of development to address stakeholder concerns. Now, this site provides a real and deliverable opportunity for high-quality development, which looks to optimise the site and enhance the surroundings. In its current form, the building is underutilised, been vacant for a notable period of time and in need of investment. The proposal will allow for the reuse of part of the premises for employment opportunities, alongside the provision of 14 good quality new homes, provided as a mix, including almost 30% as 3-bedroom family dwellings. All dwellings will have access to private outdoor space, plus access to a communal garden area. There are also benefits to soften the site and enhance its biodiversity credentials, with the application supported by landscaping schemes. Given the varied building heights in the locality, the proposal makes best use of the land by uplifting the built form whilst being sensitive to surrounding buildings and their occupiers. The technical information submitted to support the application, and as reported on in the committee report, demonstrates that matters such as daylight and sunlight and overlooking have been addressed through the design process, and all policy and guidance has been met, and I would obviously stress that members, please do take a look at that report. Where there has been an impact identified, it is within the parameters of what is deemed acceptable in the relevant guidance. You will see that the officer has thoroughly addressed these matters with regard to impact on surrounding buildings, and indeed the applicant team have gone further than would typically be expected in the assessments, considering properties further afield. As you've heard, the application is to be car-free, with future residents being enabled to apply for parking permits in the surrounding CPZs. The overall reduction in commercial floor space means that any traffic associated with that use will be no greater than the current situation at site, which is a commercial use. One disabled parking space will be provided on the site. Affordable housing contribution is made to go towards the delivery of affordable homes in the borough alongside other Section 106 obligations that are detailed in the report. The design approach to the development will be set out by Paul Ruff, the architect.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillors. Following John's commentary on the application, I wanted to just talk very briefly about the design, but also to confirm that we're available for any questions. Obviously, there's lots of information in this application. Firstly, I'd like to say this is a real testament to collaborative design. We've been working with officers through the pre-app process since 2022. Through that period, the most appropriate design has been developed for this site. This is an example of an existing building which can be reused and rehabilitated, both for commercial ground floor use that reactivates an existing dead end, provides a thoroughfare and links with the local council's own aspirations for the area on the underpass. We provide 14 new high quality homes that are built over and above NPPF and London Housing Design Guide space standards. And we've allocated 1 new tree per new home on this tight brownfield site. The scheme also addressed the council's own small sites programme, where areas such as these need to be challenged in terms of delivering new homes. Here we've increased the opportunity of appropriate family living, and we have created an urban greening factor of 0.4, which is at the upper levels of such a hard, currently concrete site. Our scheme also looks at providing carbon savings way in excess of the existing targets. We have a 67% carbon saving, and council design officers and case officers were unanimous in their support of the design and in the protection of the reuse of the existing building. This was not an opportunity to demolish and rebuild. Everything has been sensitively considered. Thank you very much, and if there are any questions, please do not hesitate to ask.
Thank you. So, colleagues, opportunity to question either party. Who would like to go first? Arian, you go.
Thank you, Chair. Question to the architect, Mr. Roof. You spoke about collaborative design. I know you spent a lot of time with the officers, which we appreciate. You heard from Councillor Ahmed and the objectors, the residents. Was there any collaboration with sort of seeking advice, or I know you spoke about the consultation, the letters that you've sent, but just to answer Councillor Ahmed and the residents about the collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So throughout the process, the collaborative approach was initially sitting with the case officers and also the council's own design panel. This enabled the appropriateness of the design to be developed to a significant level before public engagement. Public engagement, as John has talked about, followed a number of different guises, and from the first planning application that was withdrawn, there are a number of comments about properties that sit outside of a normal area of consideration. So Wesley Gardens sits significantly outside of that footprint, and therefore what we did with officers is address through further design development and daylight and sunlight analysis any potential issues that they may be needing response to. And the BRE guidance for daylight sunlight showed that there were no harmful effects. There are obviously comments about overlooking, which again, in the context of the position of the building, will not provide any overshading given we're circa 40 metres away. What we did do, sorry, apologies, this cuts out. What we did do is also a dedicated engagement where we went into Wesley Gardens and sought to look to speak with their representatives and answer any questions, and to show how any considerations over and above those that are mandatory required were accommodated.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for your answer. Just like to go to the objectives, Councillor and the resident. You heard from the applicant about the withdrawal of the previous one just because of the collaborative design. I don't know, from your side, what sort of counter answer would you give that? Because he specifically said there's one application that's been withdrawn, reassessed, and put forward again. Thank you.
It's positive that you met with the residents of Wesley Square. I'm not aware of any meeting with any other residents in the area, including those who actually this is going to impact the most in terms of reduced sunlight. There was no engagement with residents of Bartle Road. The only engagement that I'm aware of is the door-to-door knocking, which, I mean, I've had a lot of experience of consultation processes, then this was particularly disappointing, and I have first-hand experience of that because I live very close to this area, so I was subject to it. It wasn't adequate at all, and I'm happy to speak to you outside of here about that. The sunlight analysis was not completed comprehensively for Wesley Square, and it wasn't done at all for any buildings in Bartle Road at all. But then at the same time, I mean, I'm wondering if there's any value in asking for these sunlight assessments to happen, because we're hearing of unacceptable reductions in sunlight in certain rooms that have been calculated in Constance Allen House across the way. And, you know, reductions of 64% in some parts of the building. So I don't know if that's not sufficient to, you know, to be a cause for concern. I don't know what is, and whether there is any value in asking for these assessments to happen in Bartle Road.
Thanks, Chairman. I have a question for the applicants. I want to talk a bit about air quality, because, as has been mentioned, I mean, this is a very challenging site for air quality. And I want to talk about both the new residents and new proposed residents and the existing ones. But firstly, for the new building, am I right in saying, based on sort of some of the conditions included in the pack, that there is going to be sort of high quality air ventilation, so at least when your windows are shut, the particulate matter, the nitrous oxide is going to be filtered out at a high level so that there's good quality air inside the building? Is that a guarantee?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, so at this stage, all of our design developments have been done based on a mixed system. So natural ventilation, which has been proved as a placebo effect and something that users prefer, but this would also be supplemented and be the baseline delivery with a MVHR system, and this would allow air changes when windows were closed, so that the air quality and any possible pollutants would be captured within a filter that would be on a maintenance cycle. And what will happen at the next stages following this hopeful approval would be relationships with your local building control officer that would then, through the power of the building regulations, make sure that all of those elements were in the system. But we've designed it based on that system. So there's a level of comfort for the residents, but there's an automated system as well. And this is very standard on any location, but obviously sensitive here, given the railway and the roadway.
Okay, thank you, that's encouraging. And then in terms of existing residents in the neighbouring buildings, are you proposing, and it's something I might follow up with officers as to how we can use certain pots of money in allocating the application, but is there anything you're proposing which will improve air quality for existing residents?
Thank you. So part of the proposal is the hard standing that sits outside of the existing building. We're looking to create a fully permeable paving area here that's supported with a soft landscaping approach, of which we're creating both a quiet zone that's screened with vegetation and also a play area that is accessible to the immediately adjacent neighbours.
Okay, and then just as part of that, I think you said there's 1 tree proposed for every unit. So am I right in saying that you're proposing 14 new trees as part of the landscape plan?
Yep, so as part of this plan there's 14 new trees proposed, and these will be carefully curated. What we have done is submitted a detailed landscape plan to show how they can be delivered. The expectation is that the soft and hard landscaping will sit under a condition discharge anyway, but what we have worked with officers is to show a robust solution of how that can be delivered without any further development. Obviously there may well be commentary later and we would look to address that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Toby.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, a lot of this is going to really be questions for officers, but there are some things I'd like to just run by. What do I want to do first? Well, one thing that I have that hasn't been brought up, so I'm going to ask residents first. Now, I mean, I know the site, and I know, I suppose my question is what, just to sort of headline it, what is the actual environment of that area like? Because, you know, as I understand it, now please do correct me if I'm wrong, I find this quite difficult to find out. As I understand it, we've had Peabody has run at least one hostel in the area, and they're for vulnerable people, as alongside general needs housing. And this is what I am going to end up bringing to officers are questions about the Met response. And I suppose what I want to ask is how do you feel about general security and the enclosure as the site is now? And do you think that what's being proposed is going to impact any potential sort of lack of safety or security? I realise I'm kind of begging the question a little bit, but in that area, because as I understand it, there are some questions around who actually operates different buildings in the area, and there's some there is a history of sort of police involvement and that sort of thing. So answer that how you think makes the most sense.
Yes, thank you for that. One of the things that has struck me is how little, I mentioned the lack of images and photographs earlier on, how little attention has been actually paid to the Bridge Close itself, which, as you have, I don't want to go into any details about what I know about people who live in there, but you have suggested there are problems. But it is a densely congested area very often, double parking, enormous number of trucks from local garages are left in there. I just think it's an inappropriate site, and it worries me that so little attention has been given to showing what that entrance through Bridge Close towards this new development is really like. And I have to pick up on something that was said earlier. I live in Wesley Square, but I went around the area. Very few people in Bridge Close over the last year have known very much about what's going on. And it's because of others, people who live locally, going and talking to them, they found out a little bit about it. And that is equally true of Colvin House, which faces Bridge Close, and Bletchington House, which is just beyond the arches. So a real concern about the impact that it's going to have on Bridge Close itself, which has hardly been mentioned.
Thank you. I just to say, this is going to come up in some questions to officers as well, so you don't have to, pack everything in. So, I mean, just quick follow-up on that. Have you seen the secure by design condition proposed number 31? Do you think that's likely? I mean, my worry is that as laid out, it's not particularly specific. And I was wondering if you felt that was going to address any of the possible security concerns that there are in Bridge Close.
Are you able to provide a bit more detail, Toby? I'm not familiar.
Well, I think it's probably, without getting too much into the weeds, we should probably leave that till we speak to the officers. Sorry, but otherwise it is just going to get too long-winded, and I need to be encouraged not to be more long-winded than I already am. Quickly, I'll and more about what are the places like. So I've heard. And as Mona, you've talked about. The 53, 58. Is that 69%? Loss of light over the 20% recommended. And we talked about, do you know what those units are like? Because, I mean, I live in a council studio flat, and a kitchenette's half of my flat. So I'm just wondering if you know on the ground what those places with supposedly acceptable but actually very high, levels of loss of light, does that represent a large amount of living space? Or?
Well, they are small units, they're cramped units, so any loss of light is going to be an issue, especially on the stairwells. In relation to that, and your earlier point, it is an extremely congested area with only one way to access it, which is through Bartle Road. You've got the tube line up top, then you've got Bartle Road, which is residential, and then running alongside that are rows of arches where there are garages, and then you have arches that take you into Bridge Close, which are extremely cramped. There's going to be no way for emergency services to be able to access that site reliably and consistently. And we know that there's as you alluded, there is a major issue with antisocial behaviour around there.
Chair, if I can ask one question, thank you. Of the applicants, just to follow up on some of that, I hope that you have some idea what Condition 31 would look like. So just before we get to the officers, I was wondering if you talk about what plans you do have for the Secure by Design proposal.
Thank you very much, Councillor. We design within the parameters of statutory guidance. Everything that we have designed meets policy, and in a number of instances betters that as an aspiration to provide a high quality new place to live. I find it a little bit difficult with scaremongery, the idea that this place is not safe for fire access. We have a series of specialist consultants that respond to all of these comments and track against statutory guidance all of the provisions. This scheme would not be in front of you if there were any concerns of either daylight, sunlight, or fire, or building and life safety.
I do understand that, but if I could just ask you to answer the question, what's that going to look like in your view?
Yep, of course. So the vast majority of the schemes that we undertake, we would look to achieve a secure by design standard. Often though, the Building Regs Part Q has superseded that. So we would be designing to Part Q, and we would welcome secure by design officer input for condition discharge. There aren't any elements in the scheme that have caused concern that meant that had to be included within the pre-app stages, but we will happily develop any design that they may see fit as refinements.
Okay, that's all for now, thank you.
First one is for the applicant, just around servicing, and I appreciate it's a tight site and just looking at the site, if you want to retain the existing building, and I can see the benefits of that for carbon, etc., providing a turning zone or whatever is probably not possible, and I appreciate that. But were any sort of maybe more innovative solutions looked at? I mean, nowadays, one of the big delivery requirements is Amazon delivery. So, you know, Amazon lockers at the front of the site, so they don't have to pull into Bridge Close. At least that would make a bit of a positive impact. Did you look at anything like that?
Thank you, Councillor. It is an existing site that's serviced from Bridge Close. The original land ownership included this part of the site as well when it had its former life. And the direct vehicle access is again via Bridge Close. What we did look at is areas outside of our ownership boundary that we could recommend to our client to look at. So one of the main elements that we've done is created a new permeable route to the underway through to the park. And the idea here is that there is a cross route for pedestrian movement through. The Amazon lockers are a very good idea, but they would sit within our site ownership, as we wouldn't have authority to put them anywhere else, and therefore that movement would go through Bridge Close anyhow. So our view was that it was better to sit with a compliant local authority-led collection strategy and delivery strategy that has been presented to officers and highways transport officers at PREAB and has been deemed acceptable. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair. Just one more, a little bit more detail from residents on the loss of light. Just because I have a question for officers, but just in case they're not able to answer it. And I'm looking particularly at Constance Allen House and Gage Brown House. And as Councillor Adam has said, I mean, some of the figures, 64%, 58%, are quite significant. And the reason in the report that that's considered acceptable is that they're kitchenettes. And I just want to know what the orientation of the apartments is. Is it that officers are saying, well, the living rooms will have no impact on their light, and it's just the kitchenettes, and therefore it's acceptable? Or are the living rooms also on the side of the new development and thus will be impacted by light? It's hard to, because I know we don't have a map of floor plan of existing buildings, but I just want to get a bit more of a feel for the light impact.
I mean, all I know is what's in the officers' report, and I think the officers might be better placed to answer that question. The figures of the 3 times the upper limit of the, recommended 20% in the report, it's dealt with by suggesting that it's less important as it happens to be sort of kitchens and stairwells. But I don't know very much about the layout. Also, can I just mention it's Councillor Ahmed. I know we're both Monas, but I'm
my
not Councillor Adam.
apologies. A slip of the tongue. My apologies.
Is there anything you'd like to add very briefly in response to what Councillor Bennett has just asked you? No. Okay. No, I'm sorry. You can't cross-question. Apologies. You can't cross-examine. Okay. Colleagues, are there any other questions you'd like to put to applicants? No. Okay. Well, all of you, thank you very much indeed for speaking. So now it's our opportunity to speak to officers about the various points that have been raised. Who'd like to go first? Tom.
So just really carrying on from that point that we were just discussing. So the kitchenettes, I mean, some of them are getting a significant decrease in their sunlight, but are we saying the living rooms of those same apartments are not getting any decrease, or are they also getting some decrease in sunlight?
Would it be helpful if I pull up the daylight and sunlight picture on the screen from the report, because that might be useful. Yep, so completely sort of understand concerns in relation to daylight and sunlight on this one, just because it is such a constrained site. As members will note from this 3D visual, you can see that the existing, the proposed application site highlighted in navy blue is quite tightly situated against the warehouses to the back of the site and to Constance Allen House and Gage Brown House. The application is supported by a daylight and sunlight assessment, which has been prepared in accordance with the BREE guidelines. And whilst we don't have access to the existing floor plans in those neighbouring buildings, we've gone off the results within that assessment. And given, if I go to the proposed, and given sort of the scale of the proposed development, the design has been worked so the upper levels have been set back and the side extension is set further away from those particular buildings. So the windows that are affected within, sort of as identified in the report, are sort of stairwells which aren't classified as habitable rooms for the purposes of assessing daylight and sunlight. And the kitchenettes which are affected, they measure about 9 square metres in size and are set away from other habitable living spaces such as living rooms. So given the other habitable spaces within those buildings which face away from the application site, officers have come to that conclusion that the impact on daylight and sunlight assessment, whilst some of the figures such as the 52%, 58% and the 64% look sort of alarmingly high, there are other habitable living spaces within the neighbouring buildings which would still receive that adequate levels of daylight and sunlight assessment. So that's why officers have come to that conclusion that it's acceptable.
Sorry, just on that last point, there are other habitable living spaces within the same apartment. So no one apartment is seeing its kitchenette decrease by 64%, but also its living room decreased by maybe not 64%, but a percentage above BRE guidelines, like 25% or something.
Yes, that's correct. There are other living spaces that would still receive the adequate levels within those apartments and flats.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Firstly, I'd just like to follow up on that, just to be very, very, very clear. So I live in a council studio, a new-ish studio, and you could absolutely say that the kitchenette is set aside from the rest of the living area. In reality, it's one room. So that's what I'm trying to find out is, are we talking about studios? Are we talking about 1 or 2 bedrooms? How big is it? And I want a picture. That's the thing. I was hoping there'd be maybe a picture or a diagram of a unit, because I can't really get a sense of what in that flat it's going to be like. Just give you that one first.
Yes, I fully appreciate the concerns with that, particularly if they are studio units, but the daylight and sunlight assessment doesn't include any existing floor plans or types of accommodation. It does.
Could we find out?
So yeah, we do. The daylight sunlight report submitted does include layouts that is gained from sort of marketing material and other historic records to show the layout of the buildings. Yeah, go on then, Paul, you speak.
No, I'm sorry, I can't allow you to speak again. I'm sorry. If it's information in the pack, then I think it's up to officers to refer to it, really. But within the pack, are there layouts of...
Would we be able to revisit that question when we've pulled up the daylight and sunlight assessment just to double check it?
Yes.
If that's okay.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. Just bear with us a second. No, I'm sorry. You're. Yeah. they can find it. No, you'll understand that the nature of a planning committee means we have to have a very set structure. It's not a sort of general conversation among parties. So we have strict rules about who's able to speak and how things are able to work. But I think in the circumstances, I think the point that's Councillor Benton has made is an important one, and I think it's something that is worth exploring with officers. Yeah.
Yes, so we found there is paragraph 8.9 in the daylight and sunlight assessment, which shows a general layout for one of the units, which shows that there are sort of a living room and bedroom set away from the kitchenette.
Chairman.
Is it not in the pack, is my question? It's in the pack.
It's published on the website, so it is part of the public domain. The layout which is included, it affects a ground floor window, and that's the layout that's been included as an example in the daylight and sunlight assessment.
Is that assessed by an independent body, and then you and the council essentially reviews that?
No, officers review the daylight and sunlight reports themselves, so we don't have any external assessor on the report.
Can you just clarify this point about, because I know with daylight and sunlight, there's a hierarchy of rooms within a building, so that like something like a sitting room sits at the top, but then something like a stair going up through a building would sit at the bottom. So something like a kitchenette, that would be somewhere in the middle. So the daylight sunlight impact on a kitchenette, would that be something of sort of intermediate importance? So if there was an impact on it, it's something that wouldn't be viewed as being necessarily something that was a major difficulty for an application. And obviously this is quite a densely populated site.
Yes, that's correct. So a kitchenette would fall within a habitable room for the purposes of assessing daylight and sunlight. The stairwells wouldn't fall within habitable rooms, so whilst there would be a loss to stairwells, we wouldn't consider that sufficient enough to warrant a reason for refusal of the application on daylight and sunlight. But kitchenettes do form part of habitable spaces. But in this particular context, given that there are other living spaces, such as the bedroom and the living room, which would be set on the other sides of the building, they would still receive adequate levels of daylight and sunlight. So if the kitchenette experienced a loss, it would almost be balanced out by the rest of the rooms still receiving adequate levels.
Thank you. Other questions? Tom?
Thank you, Chairman. I have a question about how we might be able to improve air quality for existing residents on the site. And I noticed there's two pots of money. There's a SIL, and then there's the it's not called a net zero fund, but carbon reduction fund or whatever it is. And I think in the addendum, some was moved out of that and into the SIL. But anyway, it doesn't really matter. My point is, can we at least investigate the opportunity to really localise that to existing residents in the immediate area for air quality measures? So that might be filtration systems for their own apartments, I mean, they're actually not very expensive nowadays. So you could get an air filtration system in every apartment on that site for quite a bit less than the proposed amount for the carbon offset fund, for example. I mean, I don't anticipate it's something we can work out all the details of this evening, but is that something which could be explored?
Yes, that could be explored. The reason sort of why officers didn't include the air quality contribution within the heads of terms was because there's no sort of increase in commercial or sort of office workshop space at the site, and that SIL would cover it. But I think we could explore options for securing it in the 106 in terms of the additional air quality funding.
Well, thank you. I think Councillor Bennett's suggestion is a very good one, because I mean, this is a significant development, but at the same time, £296,000 is also a measurable amount of money, and I think if legally it was possible within, clearly the Section 106 is an envelope that the developer has in principle agreed to. I think that's something that we should explore. Is that possible? I don't know. Amanda, would you like to comment perhaps?
It's just really asking Councillor Bennett for clarification as to the question. Are you asking for a portion of the carbon offset contribution to be utilised towards air quality mitigation? Is that the crux of it?
Yes, although I did note, and maybe I didn't fully understand it in the addendum, that money was being taken out of the carbon offset and put into SIL. So whether it were to come from SIL or the carbon offset, I have no opinion on. Yeah. The point is to make a significant amount of money available for air quality improvements for existing residents. I mean, a good air quality air filtration system for an apartment, for example, costs about £1,000 for a really good quality one. And so a sum like £290,000 would be able to provide for that for any existing residents who wanted one.
I'm not confident that we would be able to technically. The carbon offset contribution is standalone and distinct, and we arrive at the figure having applied a formula, full stop, and then separate to that, absolutely, in terms of air quality, contributions are usually sought using a different methodology. I'm not confident, I'm looking to colleagues here, that we could shift some of the money over to be used for a different purpose without falling foul of meeting the requirements of the tests. So I'm looking to colleagues as to whether or not that's possible.
Yes, I've just checked the Section 106 SPD that we've got in terms of the air quality contribution. We seek them for a major development that includes a new industrial or warehouse office spaces. This is an existing commercial space. And then any other uses which have a nil SIL, and in this case there is a SIL payable of a quite large sum. So in this instance we didn't seek the contribution for the air quality, given the restrictions in the SPD.
Well, I wonder if, given that, then whether we could look at using a portion of the SIL for that reason, because SIL's quite broad in what it could be used for. So, yeah, if that could be investigated.
Certainly, we could look into it. If it falls within the definition of infrastructure as defined in the legislation, then we could explore that, Councillor.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, colleagues. Yes, just for members of the public present, the use of Section 106 money is governed by quite complex legal regulations. It's not just a pot of money that the council or the council officers can just use as they see fit. There's a lot of requirements relating to it. But I think we've heard officers give an indication that we'll see what we can do, because CIL, which is Community Infrastructure Levy, that money actually does have a slightly broader remit. So some of that money can potentially be used for some of these things that we've discussed. I'd like to just, if I may, colleagues, just raise a final point, which I think is important. This site is it is rather a tucked away kind of site between the Westway and the Hammersmith and City line. Are we absolutely sure that things relating to fire safety in particular, I'm thinking of the access for fire appliances, that kind of thing, in the unfortunate event of an emergency, are we confident that is covered? And I think there is maybe a fire safety condition, but are we absolutely sure that is in fact okay?
Yes, absolutely. It's a very valid point to raise given the tight nature of the site and the access. A fire strategy was submitted as part of the application process, which our building control team have reviewed, and they've considered it to be acceptable. But to go that extra step further, we have conditioned a final fire strategy to be submitted prior to the commencement of the above groundworks. And the fire strategy will also be scrutinised further at building regulation stage.
Thank you. And a final question. So the last condition 31, secured by design. So that is a condition relating to safety involving the Met and trying to work out some of the issues that were raised by members of the public earlier on. So that's something which also has to be addressed in detail before the application things can actually happen. Yeah.
Yes, that's also a pre-commencement condition.
Okay. Are there any other final questions at all? Toby, did you want to come in at the end? Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yes, and I appreciate being able to ask one more question, which is to follow up on this last one. Obviously, I've been mentioning, and thank you for bringing that up, secured by design. And that is really actually about the assessment that led to the comments from the Met consultee and how that came about. I suppose the reason I'm asking, just to sort of be clear about it, is I do understand that place as can be quite a sort of leery place to walk through, you know, and so I'm wondering if there are any further comments from the Met, and you know, furthermore, it doesn't mean a whole lot to me, just as a normal person, that there's been a report, there's going to be this thing. I don't really know what that's going to look like, and I'm slightly worried that if the Met isn't flagging it as a sort of place that's potentially dangerous in certain ways, and again, this is anecdotal, I appreciate that, and I really would look for more assurances as to what kind of security measures would be, you know, what the rubric would be, basically. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think so. So the Met Police, they're obviously a statutory consultee on major applications. So they've reviewed the proposals and consider it to be obviously acceptable, subject to this secured by design condition, which is a pre-commencement condition, so would need to be submitted before any works can commence on site. So if it was found to, I guess, not be acceptable, because we would further consult with the Met Police once that information had been provided to us, then works wouldn't be able to commence on site. And it also goes that step further in Part B of the condition, which states prior to occupation, a satisfactory secured by design final inspection would take place to ensure that all the works have been carried out and ensure compliance in all these areas as well. But I suppose further security and police measures would be carried out separately to the planning process as well. And if it also gives members comfort, there's also an additional condition requesting details of lighting for the external amenity areas, which is also a pre-commencement condition in condition 3. So I don't know if that adds further comfort that there would be a lighting strategy as well.
Just tiny little follow-up. Who actually is responsible for, this is my ignorance, for the secured by design? Who is signing off on that?
It would be the police that sign off on that.
Okay, thank you. Just double checking.
Thanks, Chairman. I just had one question on overlooking I forgot to ask earlier. So in the report it says there are no new direct views from the terraces or the balconies, I think. But just looking, and maybe if you could bring up some of the final CGI images, CG images. Yeah, so that one, or maybe more the other one. Yeah, that one. So I mean, I'm just trying to work out how there are no direct views, given that it looks like the sort of balcony cum terraces face into that building opposite. So could you give us a bit more information on that, please?
Yes, so on the existing building, there are a number of windows, albeit the existing site is not in a residential use just yet, but it does front onto a couple of windows at the back, which again face sort of stairwells and small kitchenettes. The terraces at the upper floor levels have been set back, and the decking area at the front would just be used for sort of emergency exits rather than actually in use by the apartments themselves, which you should be able to see on the proposed floor plans in the pack. They are set back to minimise overlooking, and the form of the upward extension is chamfered, and it's set in to ensure that there would be, or to minimise the overlooking impacts. But if members were concerned, we could add some screening conditions.
Well, one thing I'm just wondering is that the decking area that you say would only be for emergency use, one could imagine a scenario where, you know, that was the intention, but the reality was it ended up becoming part of day-to-day use. Is there anything we can do within the conditions, just in sort of the final design details, to ensure that that is not possible, that could happen?
Yeah, we could condition that flat roof to not be used as a terrace, or that part of the roof.
I suppose to be incapable of being used, or?
Yeah, we've included condition 21 in the officer's report, which says the roof of the building at the first floor level, excluding the designated patio and balcony areas, shall not be used at any time as a terrace or amenity space, and that's an enforceable condition.
So there's just a difference between shall not be used and is not capable of being used. I know we've done things before where, to prevent overlooking, we've gone further than just saying you can't use that area. We've said it has to be designed in a way such that it can't be used day to day.
Yes, yeah, that's the wording we've used is our standard wording, and on the approved drawings, I don't think it allows for access really onto that level.
Sorry, Chairman. We can strengthen that condition 21, for example, to say the roof of the building at the first floor level, excluding the designated patio and area, shall only be used as an access to the residential units and shall not be used at any time as a terrace amenity space. So it kind of covers that they can only access it for the residential, if that's...
Okay, that's probably that probably achieves what we want it to achieve. I mean, some of the devil will be in the detail when it's designed to sort of make sure that there's a clear demarcation. But I mean, that condition, as you say, is enforceable. So I'll probably leave it there.
Now, just before we need to make a decision, actually, Councillor Bennett, I'm thinking about condition 28. Now, I think you were interested in saying that in relation to trees, there was the ecological management plan, and I think your point was that we would want condition 28 to sort of explicitly look at extra tree planting in the area. Yeah. Am I recalling that correct?
Yes, I think, I mean, the applicants mentioned 14 trees.
Yes.
So if we could say 14, or if for whatever reasons that's not possible, then the maximum number possible, or something like that.
Yes, that could be put into that condition.
All right, very good. Well, thank you very much. So, colleagues, need to make a decision about this.
Sorry, Chairman, can I just bring one more thing to your attention? Sorry. Just within the addendum report, we did change the figures within the contribution. I do just want to flag up that 90,000 within the addendum report doesn't include the affordable housing contribution. It's just all the other contributions without the affordable housing.
Okay. So we have the application in front of us. I think that clearly this is it's quite a constrained site. It's a difficult place to create new homes. However, 14 new homes is a valuable contribution to the borough's housing stock, and I'm sure there will be people who will be delighted in due course if this is indeed granted and built out, people who will be very happy to live there. So I think that's an important factor. I think in relation to daylight and sunlight, we've had quite a lot of discussion about it. I think daylight sunlight, to my mind, is a highly specialised sort of matter relating to guidance, and I think on balance, what the officers have said, I feel is definitely correct. In terms of sense of excuse me, in terms of sense of enclosure, which is actually a rather more subjective judgment, I think although the proposed buildings are nearby other buildings, I'm not sure that they really meet that test. And I think taken in the round, the various disadvantages and problems with the application, I think don't really get near to matching the overall benefit of creating new homes in the borough. So my suggestion to colleagues would be that the application on balance is acceptable. And before we take a vote, I think we should note the amendment to condition 21, which we just discussed, strengthening that, and also condition 28, talking about the provision of extra trees. So I think with those things in mind, the office recommendation is to grant. Can I see those in favour of granting on that basis, please? Those against? Okay, so that's granted by 4 votes to 1. Councillor Benton voted against. Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed, everyone. Thank you for coming along. And that concludes our meeting this evening. Thank you.